All right, it's 1:02, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Um, People can come on in as they come. Y'all do me a favor again and kind of get used to throwing those cameras on for me. It's only fair. Um, I get tired of looking at myself all day. So what we're going to talk about today is person first philosophy in therapeutic recreation. Um, that's important in that, it comes down to the video that we watched in a previous class where we, the ramp of hope, where he was clearly talking down to the guy. And we're going to have situations in recreation therapy where we'll be dealing with different people who may have disabilities, or anyone that we work with is for the most part going to have something that we're addressing. So um, we just need to not identify them by their disability or by their issue, and talk to them just like anyone else. That's what's kind of important on this person first philosophy. And I know that it's common sense, but people, um, I worked at the regional center here in town, used to be called the Retardation Center. So, we're dealing with people with developmental disabilities. And I would see new staff come in, and they would talk real slow to them like this so they could understand, and or they would talk super loud, or things like that really aren't necessary. It's kind of, you can talk to them just like anyone else for the most part. Now, if someone has hearing issues or something, that's going to change how you're going to speak with them. But otherwise, it's going to be person first and not disability first is what we're looking at. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my PowerPoint and we'll go from there. So let me get that shared. Okay, somebody give me a thumbs up if you got the PowerPoint. Thank you. So again, person first philosophy. Let me backtrack. I meant to tell you guys, I took a look at the syllabus today, and there's some things on there. A lot of the class didn't change from previous semesters, so I didn't have to. I tried to update some things, but I left Special Olympic bowling on there. That is not going to happen. That's on our syllabus, so just disregard that. And again, don't necessarily go by the dates on the syllabus as far as what we're going to cover. Go by what I tell you and what we do here in class. You can't necessarily look at that and see if because we might get off of that track a little bit by the route that we're running. So just those were two things that I wanted to mention. Another thing, Special Olympics is not going to be occurring this semester, which was something that I hoped that we could maybe do and have some volunteering with that. I think it's a good experience, but they're not doing Special Olympics due to problems with insurance. You've got some situations where they don't want tons and tons of claims with vulnerable adults, due to pulling all of them together, and they're not the best at social distancing. They love giving hugs and high fives and all that good stuff. So probably a good choice in all truth, as much as I wish we could do Special Olympics, but that won't be happening either. So we'll just talk about person first concepts related to the people with disabilities, person first terminology, what that means. We'll talk about how some people have trouble with this and how it can be overcome. Another thing that's important is that we need to help people that we work with through our attitudes to learn to embrace differences. It's not necessarily a negative thing. Also, we'll identify factors that influence people's attitudes toward people with disabilities and talk about some different philosophical models that have to do with delivery of TR, therapeutic rec. So the person with a disability, they are faced with consistently stereotypes or labels. Now, that's not just someone with a disability, that's in general. People make assumptions based on how someone looks, and we see that in today's world. You know, that's one of the big topics right now is, you know, equality, and that goes not just for people with disabilities, but for people in general, is that we shouldn't be stereotyping and using labels, things like that. Now, there's some situations where labels may be appropriate, such times like when we use them to provide appropriate care. Say, for example, there's a syndrome called Prader-Willi syndrome, where a big issue with them is that they don't have the thing that tells us that we're full and tells us to stop eating. They don't really have that. They'll eat themselves to death almost. So there's appropriate care. We can label them to a degree because we know that we need to watch out for food issues and them eating things that they shouldn't eat and things like that. Some other things that labels can do, they can give us access to resources and accommodations that relate to specific groups and provide for program enrollment. You know, there may be a situation where you're not trying to label someone or stereotype them, but you may have a swimming league for individuals with Down syndrome, something like that. That's not a labeling situation. That is getting them with their peers and giving them a normalized activity that they're able to do. So the legal definition of a disability from the ADA is there. And if I don't have it posted on here, I'll try to remember to post some information about ADA, exactly what that is, because there are several things that constitute a disability. I'll post that for you guys. Person first language. This is how we talk about people, to people. How do we do this in a positive manner? You want to focus on the person, not on their disability. You know, you have to, when you're focusing on the person and not their disability, then they're going to feel valued. And realize that there is a difference between disability and handicap. So, person first philosophy, that's what this whole chapter is kind of about. We need to realize that everybody has different qualities. Uniqueness is not necessarily a negative thing, it's a positive attribute, can be looked at in that way, and that's the way that we need to treat it as recreation therapists. And realize that all people have potential to grow and develop as human beings. No matter what level of functioning you may be, no matter what is going on in your life, we all have the potential to grow and develop and get better in our own ways. Some different ways to incorporate this terminology. It needs to be done in both written and in verbal communication that we have with our clients, and also needs to be shown through our behavior. You know, like the guy in the Ramp of Hope video, our poor guy here, he, you know, and he's putting his hand on his shoulder and just pandering to him. Was terrible behavior. Not the way to deal with someone who has some sort of disability. In person first terminology, remember that words are important and that we need to use respectful language and place the person before the disability, as in, okay, rather than saying, Tom is autistic, you are saying that he is autistic. If you say, Tom is dealing with autism, Tom has been diagnosed as having autism, sounds a whole lot better than saying Tom is autistic. You're saying that's what he is, therefore that defines him. That's just a portion of what Tom is. You want to convey respect through words, and that's really, to me, that's one of the number one things with this person first terminology. You're avoiding words such as special, challenged, things like that. Another awesome example from that video that we watched. I mean, he was using much of these things that we're talking about. And don't treat adults with disabilities as children. That's another thing that I have seen firsthand. And people do it all the time. Just because they may be on a lower functioning level intellectually does not mean that they should be treated as children. Staff at the regional center where I worked, I'd hear them all the time. Well, I'll be up there with the kids in a little while. They're talking about a group of people that are older than they are. You've got 40-year-old people and they're calling them kids. Mental age and chronological age are different, and they need to be treated by their chronological age, not by their developmental age. There's a lot of barriers that come into play when you're talking about people with disabilities. They have constraints and limitation due to a lot of times in environmental barriers, environments that are not accessible to them, designs of programs that are not built to facilitate their participation. That's not, that's just as bad as an environment that doesn't have accessibility. Staff training is another thing that's huge. The staff that are going to be working with clientele need to be trained on the people that they're working with. And if they're not, then that is going to hold back progress from what is being done. And also attitudes of the people that are working with people with disabilities. You've got to have an attitude of wanting to help. You've got to have an attitude of equality between yourself. You're not better than them. You're just different than them. That's kind of the key on this. You want to model empowerment. It's like I've said before, you really want them to make as many choices as they can. That's where this comes into play. You want to teach them to serve as change agents for themselves, where they make choices. They see that they can improve on their current situation and work on things as much as they can. You want to promote the dignity and the rights of others, obviously, and challenge myths and stereotypes. There's nothing better than than doing something that somebody says you can't. To me, that's one of the best things in the world. I love doing something that somebody tells me I cannot do. Same thing goes for the people that we're working with. They know, a lot of them, what sort of stereotypes are out there. The guy in the Ramp of Hope, he knew that the fella talking, Mr. Mayor, he didn't think he could go down the steps, and that he needed their ramp, and that he needed to be treated special and all these things. So he definitely challenged stereotypes by going down the steps in his wheelchair. obviously. You want to teach them skills for empowerment, teach them to be more independent in leisure, and try to give them some new ways of thinking about leisure. Now, there's a leisure ability model that was done by Stumbo and Peterson in 2004. And what it is the main topics there is you want to teach them new recreation skills that are available to them. Find out what skills they have for recreation and what are their strong points. Teach them how to make leisure choices in their life and how to use community resources, not just how to use them, but then you can also help as a recreation therapist by telling people what resources are out there, what sort of recreation outlets are available, what can they do, where can they do it, and then say it's someone who is developmentally disabled or has a developmental disability. They're not, and they don't have a driver's license per se. You may be able to tell them, that they can use the outbus to get there. You can meet it here, information like that. This is how much it costs to participate in this. The things that you give them from information helps them to make leisure choices and to actually participate in things on their own. Social inclusion, we've talked about that some already too. And that's basically just a feeling of belonging. And that is another thing that I kind of was hoping that you guys could see in Special Olympics is that there's unified sports, which is about as good of a social inclusion situation as I can think of, where you're on a team with people without disabilities and people with disabilities all playing together. So they're all on the same playing field, literally on the same playing field and on equal ground. So in that way, they're able to share common experiences. Everybody gets to participate. It's the importance there is in participation by all. And if it's a situation where somebody, now we all can be competitive and we all love to win. But if this is done right, you got to realize who you're working with and what you're trying to accomplish. If this is done the right way, then winning is not the number one goal. You want everyone to be able to participate and be supportive and help them to have fun with the situation while you're sharing an experience with them. Also, it means so much to these individuals to feel as though they actually belong to a group, that you can see the pride in their eyes by just being on a team. And they're so happy that they're on a team with you, And it says here, lack of social acceptance is more limiting than architectural or program barriers. And that is absolutely the truth. Feeling inadequate and feeling not accepted, then you can see how that would make you not want to put yourself in certain positions. It would me, for sure. Least restrictive environment. This is important. This will be tested on, so make sure you note this. In a least restrictive environment, adaptations are made only when evidence shows that the person with a disability needs assistance to function. Okay, this comes down to letting them be, in simple terms, you are letting them be as independent as possible. You let them do for themselves anything and everything that they can by themselves. The more things that you do for them, the more you are kind of depowering them to a degree, if it's something that they're able to do. A good example of this is, and I'm going to revert again back to the North Mississippi Regional Center. And remember, when I'm talking about NMRC, we're talking about people with developmental disabilities. You're getting ready to start the day. You're trying to get all the clients up and get them to school. But we'll go with Tom again. Tom is able to dress himself. Tom is able to pick out his clothes. Now, you're in a rush because you want to get everybody to school on time. So what you want to do is just go in there, jump in the closet and say, here you go, Tom. Here, let me see your feet. I got to get these socks on you. And before you know it, you're basically, he's being dressed. He's having his clothes picked out for him when he could do those things on his own. The problem, as a lot of the staff kind of see it as a problem, is that it slows down the process because he's making these choices and doing it himself. You could do it faster if you were just helping him. But by doing that, you are holding them back. So you might need to start waking Tom up 15 minutes early to give him the opportunity to make these choices and do these things on his own. That's important. Adaptations that you do use for people are based on their strengths and limitations. You don't want to do more adaptation than you can. If someone is unable to hold a regular fork or spoon for meals, you don't necessarily go straight to just feeding them. The next option would be to try maybe they have spoons that have built up handles on them that's bigger and easier to hold. You would try that. Let them try to feed themselves with a different option. If they spill their food off of a regular plate, get a plate with raised edges and try that. Now, as a general rule in recreation therapy, we're not doing a lot of feeding. This is a good example of least restrictive environment, of how you give them adaptations that they can use to complete things on their own without you having to do it for them. So as their skills get better, you may be able to whittle away some of the adaptations that you have given them. If you give them too much assistance when they don't need it, then you may actually make them regress rather than grow. And that's very important not to do that. Interdependence. Okay, we all know what independence is, but if we talk about interdependence, that's a relationship of cooperation and reciprocity between participants and staff, where a good example of this again is the Unified Sports and Special Olympics kind of. You work together, interdependence. You depend on each other to accomplish goals and objectives. Now that makes your clients feel great too, because you're all on a team. You all are working on a set goal or objective. An example listed here is painting a wall mural. Now the key here is depending on your clientele. I mean, you may not be putting out something that Michelangelo would be proud of, but it's something that you and your clients could be proud of and realize that you work together to paint a wall mural together. That's the key. Interdependence is working together. So know what independence, interdependence, know the difference there. Okay, through the years, we all know that there's been different treatment of people who have disabilities, and people have ingrained attitudes toward people with disabilities. You think about segregation, you talk about discrimination. Even when you think about people who are developmentally delayed, they didn't used to have the opportunity to live in community homes and group homes and things like that. They were probably put in an asylum or an institution that is the true definition of what you picture when you hear the word institution. You know, these people were in concrete walls, you know, just being watched by 2 staff, and there'd be 100 clients walking around in there doing nothing. You know, it's changed a lot through the years. The attitudes have actually improved quite a bit, and they're being seen more as people and individuals, and not being segregated like they were before. There's been times where people were, it says heroization for living with a disability. They're not only would it not feel good to have someone say, "Oh, you poor thing, you know, I don't know how you do this every day. You poor thing, you." Not fun. This is kind of the same path. You have somebody saying, like, overplaying how awesome someone is for having a disability. They're going to see through that also. They want to be treated like everyone else, bottom line. And that's what this, person-centered philosophy is. A lot of times people with disabilities have felt invisible. They're not included. They're not chosen for teams. They're not able to do things with people who don't have disabilities, and they feel like people have looked past them or kind of through them, not really seeing them as equals. So that's because they were focusing on the disability first, not the person. And if we focus on the person first, not the disability, then that is taken care of, and it's not the case. So there's been some influence of institutions on the changes in attitudes through the years. Schools, they had an influence in that segregation of children with disabilities. You think of special ed classes, and that's still there to a degree, although they're doing a whole lot better with trying to include these students in regular classrooms. And what that does, it teaches other children that their peers with disabilities don't belong with them. When that's the short bus kids. I'm just being real. I've heard that before. When they're segregated because of a disability, that teaches kids that it's okay for that to be the case, and it's not okay. Family influence, the family, you hear this when people have children, and I'll raise my hand. I'm the same way. When my boys were born, I'm looking and I'm counting toes and fingers, and I'm looking to make sure everything's the right shape. I mean, you want your kid to be perfect. You don't want them to have a disability. So, yes, I did feel blessed. And I do feel blessed that my children don't have a disability. But if they did, I would love them just the same. It wouldn't make them less of a person. And that's important. Peer influence, they want that sense of belonging. And a lot of their peers perceive themselves as superior because of, going right back to the school influence where people are segregated. You're obviously going to feel superior if you know that you're in a class that's receiving higher education than what they're getting. So you get that perception of superiority. And as far as leisure, recreation and leisure programs have always been segregated, and that's something that is improving a lot. At the park commission here in town, we had it was originally called the Challenger League, and now it's called League of Champions, and they are leisure programs open to the public that are not 100. What they do is they get people with disabilities to come out, participate in recreation activities that they didn't have the opportunity to participate in prior to now. And they have a lot of volunteers and peers of even their same ages that come and participate in the whole situation to help them feel normalized. You know, they're part of society. People have always thought, as far as leisure, and in large part this is true, skills performed differently are inferior and less enjoyable. I wouldn't say less enjoyable by any stretch of the imagination, but obviously someone with spina bifida is not going to be as good of a high diver as someone who is not. That's just facts. But it doesn't mean that they can't improve, and it definitely doesn't mean that they're not going to have as much fun as someone who doesn't have a disability. Advertising influence, a lot of times you've seen advertisements that are along the line of the video that we watched, where it just basically makes you feel like people with disabilities don't get the opportunity for a full life and they can't do enjoyable recreation. I went to a conference last year, and one of the speakers was, her name was Jill Moore, and she had spina bifida, or has spina bifida, and she's confined to a wheelchair. But let me tell you, she has done more things in her life than I have, and she makes every day count. She talked about all the different things that she's doing. She's getting married. Her and her fiance, who is also in a wheelchair, they are renovating their home right now. She has skydived. She has done so many things. So just because someone may be different, it doesn't mean that they're not getting to do recreation just like you or I would get to do. Influence of language on attitudes. So the way we talk, our language, is a pretty accurate gauge of our beliefs. What we think, how we feel, the way we talk is going to come out that way. So, and these things that we say paint these vivid pictures of the stereotypes that everybody expects. We're putting people as objects. That's obviously a no-no. You put them in a category, like terms like the blind, the retarded, the disabled. You are definitely putting people in a box, and you're talking to them as an object. And that's something that we don't want to do. Using them and us language, that is, again, separatist in nature, and we're pointing out the differences between us, not the similarities between us. So watch the way that we talk to people, because our language is definitely a mirror of our attitudes. What we say says a lot about how you feel. Everybody slips up now and then, but at the same time, as a general rule, you're going to talk the way that you feel. Some laws have come out that actually have helped with this person-centered idea. IDEA, you need to know what this is. It's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Basically what it is all students with disabilities have a right to a free and appropriate public education. That influences the services that they get, as well as the attitudes that people have toward them. So know what IDEA is. The ADA, it requires private and public organizations to include persons with disabilities in all aspects of service and access. That's when you think ADA, you ask, is Well, is the building ADA accessible? You think of accessibility. ADA has to do with how many parking spots are there for handicap. You know, what is the ratio of the ramp elevation? Does it fit ADA? ADA is probably the biggest law that has come out as far as helping people with disabilities by trying to really promote inclusion and accessibility. Now, what it does, it even protects, like in the workplace, as far as applying for jobs, trying to get employment, things like that. Now, if you have an individual who has a disability that is qualified for a job, and you have a person that does not have a disability that is qualified for the job, the ADA does not force you to hire the person with the disability. You still hire the person that is most qualified for the job. It's not a situation where it places them above anyone else. They just want equal. Okay? So the problem with laws is that they just address behaviors. They address what is there, what can happen. It has nothing to do with attitudes. So by changing and improving in this whole situation, there's a new generation that's growing up that is more used to inclusion. They're not seeing as much, separatist philosophy when it comes to us versus them. So hopefully this will play into a positive change in people's attitudes. So as far as service delivery, you've got 3 different models here. You need to be aware of what they are. I feel like they are on the test as well. Social reform, basically you want to keep children off the streets and out of trouble. Medical model looks at service delivery as this. It's the responsibility of society to cure disabilities. Not really, that's not the case. Recreation is seen as therapy, which it is if it's used in a purposeful way. Now, that's the key. If it's not being used in a purposeful way, then it's not recreation therapy, it's just recreation. The social model, disability is seen to be the result of social discrimination. Whereas in the medical model, the fact that someone is different from the physical norms gives them a disadvantage for securing quality of life equal to someone who doesn't have this variation from physical norms. So in the social model, again, those that don't meet the norms, they're assumed to be inferior. They're subject to social exclusion, which obviously goes against everything as recreation therapists we kind of believe in. Therapeutic recreation advocates for the rights of people with disabilities. And that's something that I truly believe in, and something that I think that we should do as good, genuine human beings, regardless of what your job of choice may be. I think that we should be advocates for people with disabilities who may need that person to step up for them and be an advocate. The ecological model, that basically says that people and environments are interconnected and that changes in one affect the other. Now, when you look at these 3 models, to me, they all make sense in some degree, and it's true. When you have a change in your environment, it's obviously going to change something with you. If you are, I don't believe, say, in the social model that disability is the result. It's not the result of social discrimination. Social discrimination is because of the disability. So, but just know what medical, social, and ecological models are all about here. Okay, let's see if there's anything on here we want to talk about. Just to review, least restrictive environment, giving the least amount of help possible to help someone be successful with what they're trying to do. If you overdo that, you are actually lowering their self-esteem and holding them back. You want to let them be as independent as possible. That's what least restrictive environment is. Even if it isn't the most convenient thing to do, like I said, sometimes you're in a time crunch, and giving them a lot of choices and letting them tie their own shoes is going to take longer than you just tying their shoes. Plan better and give them time, because you're not letting them be in their least restrictive environment if that's the case. I will come back and post about the ADA. I'll put it under the content right here close to this stuff, and maybe we'll talk about it next class. How can labels be detrimental to people with disabilities? This is common sense. We know that people with disabilities don't want to be labeled. We know that it puts them in a negative frame of mind, and it is not going to be empowering to them. So we don't want to do that. ADA and IDEA, we talked about those. You need to remember both of those for the test and realize that what each one of them does as far as helping people with disabilities. IDEA is about education for all, basically. ADA is about equal opportunity for people with disabilities.
So when will our test be?
It's still kind of open right now. I'm wanting to just see how quickly we can get through this material, and then we'll have a class that we will do a review, and then the test I'll open up. I'll put the test on Blackboard and give you a, I don't know, 2 or 3 day span to take it. All I ask when you do that is that you, when you start it, go ahead and finish it. You know, don't start it and back out of it and all that. I'll give you a 2 or 3 day span to take the test for sure. And I'll let you know in time. Like I say, if you show up for the review day, you'll be very much ready for the test, and it'll be easy. So don't miss on that.
I bet. Appreciate it.
Yes, you bet. You'll have plenty of forewarning though. It won't just be like, okay, here's your test one day. I'll give you enough warning where you won't be shocked. Okay. I'm going to run through this. This one is not, this one kind of falls in the same category to me. A lot of it as the history, not the most exciting stuff that we'll go over, but that's why I want to kind of just zip through it today and go ahead and knock this one out. Okay. It's not too bad. There's some things that are interesting in here, but there's some other things that I'm going to more or less skip over because I'm not going to test on them, and they're not things that would really, they're not going to make you buy into recreation therapy or not, you know, sort of things like that. So we'll talk about this one is a lot of the things that are interesting in here are talking about demographics of people with disabilities, and the numbers and things that we will talk about here have probably changed some. This book has a newer edition, but this gives you an idea at the very least. All right, so who do we work with as therapeutic recreation specialists? We not only work with our clients, we serve people, we serve families. 1 in 2 families are touched by someone with a disability of some sort, 50%. We talked about allied professionals in chapter 7. That was the one that I told you that you need to be prepared for, like a giant matching question for that, where we talked about the other groups such as nursing, psychology, psychiatry, and all those. Some other people that we work with that weren't there, architects, you know, if we're looking to reach ADA compliance, or at my child's school, they have an ADA playground. They have swings for children in wheelchairs, things like that. You may have to work with an architect for these special designs, things like that. Park and rec professionals, educational professionals, and rehabilitation team, which may be just a group of allied professionals like we talked about. Now, as an advocate, like I say, sometimes we need to be advocates for our clients or the people that we work with. They need someone to speak up for them. And it may be a situation where it may even be writing a letter to a politician or a legislator about funding or something like that. I've done that in the past, but when they were talking about cutting funding for mental health, that directly affected the people that I serve and myself. You know, that's the things that I was able to do with my people is very much affected by the budget that comes to mental health when I was working at that facility. So, demographics of a disability. Now, this is just kind of for interest. It's not, I'm not going to ask you exactly what the median income is, but it would be higher now than it is now. People who have a child with a disability, the median income for the family is $39,000 at this time. Pretty low. They don't leave their job because they're scared of losing health care insurance. Families without a child who has a disability, they have a median income of $49,000, and what it is they're not afraid of losing their health care short term because they don't have a child with a disability, and they'll change jobs, move, things like that in order to get increased pay. So it shows you, even if the numbers have changed, that families that don't have a child with a disability are going to have a higher income as a whole because they have more flexibility, I think. There's been advances in medical technology. There's more people that are entering the community with disabilities. There didn't used to be group homes, community homes, where people are being put into homes in communities around, you know, in neighborhoods. There are community homes that are associated with NMRC that have, you know, 10 to 12 clients living in these homes. But they're getting more and more out into the communities. And healthcare has gotten better with this group also, and allowed them to be able to get into the community too. There's an increase of disability with age. Now, don't let me, because I talk a lot about NMRC and developmental disabilities, just don't let that jump in as the only disability, because obviously it's not. It's just the one that I've had the most personal experience with. 16% of people between the ages of 3 and 64 have disability of some sort. 31% of people 65 or older have a disability of some sort. And the baby boomers, it's here because we've still got the baby boomers with us. There is a larger and larger, you know, number of elderly there, and that's another reason why recreation therapy is growing so much right now, because as you get older, you have more disabilities, and baby boomers need recreation therapists to help them with these disabilities. So thus you've got the increased need for therapeutic rec specialists. Something that comes into play when services are provided for people who have disabilities you're going to need more staff than for the quote average public. More training required of your staff. Okay, remember these numbers here. As far as staff to client ratio, if it's a 1 staff to 15 person ratio for people without disabilities. So then you look at a 1 to 4 ratio, or even sometimes 1 to 1, one-on-one ratio of staff to people with disabilities. So obviously what you're going to see there is an increase in cost to the company or the facility. You know, if you got 16 clients, you know, or say 15, you could have 1 staff caring for that many people if they were not, if it wasn't, or giving a program to people without disabilities. If you're trying to do that same thing for people with disabilities, you're going to need 4 staff instead of 1. So clearly that is going to incrementally rise the amount of cost, you know, 3 times or more higher for the facility. There's been decrease in funds, higher prices for programs in park and recreation. A lot of times they have to have higher prices for people with the disabilities to cover these extra staff needs. Not a good thing, because we talked about how families that have children with disabilities have less money. So you pair that with having to hike up prices. That's not a good combination to me. ADA, people with disabilities pay the same fees as those without disabilities. So that is being, if someone wanted to push it, they could use ADA to make sure that they did not have to pay any higher price than anyone else had to. So it kind of cuts out on that issue where, say, programs in Park and Rec, they couldn't really raise the price legally without, you know, if someone wanted to push that envelope. If they have to increase fees to cover that, then they have to do it across the board to everybody, not just for the group with disabilities. So it affects everyone to a degree. Something that they've shown is, as far as charitable gifts dealing with disabilities, donations by individuals have risen and donations by companies have actually dropped. That was the trend. Okay, in a situation, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but if there's ever a situation where you're needing to be an advocate for someone who has a disability, and you do have to give information or trying to get something from, say, a legislator, then you need to try to build a relationship with them and get them to know and trust you. They need to know that you're motivated to do the right thing for the right reason, and that you're not just trying to be a bully, you know, or smear their name. You need to do things in the right way by giving them facts that are actual facts and observations that they can, you know, base decisions on as far as what they're going to push to legislate. So if you have some sort of idea that you wanted to really try, you know, you have, you know, just say Roe versus Wade or some of these other bills that have been passed, they had to start somewhere. So the process for that, an idea has to come first, then it has to pass through the whole legislative process. So if you ever had a situation where it came to that point, you'd have to find a sponsor or a legislator, somebody who knows you, believes in your issue as well, someone who has a good record of passing legislation, someone who works well with other legislators someone who's a good communicator. So a thing to worry about is just being consistent when you're dealing with them with what you're trying to get accomplished. And then once it goes from there, it goes from there to a committee. Legislators from both parties look, they screen the bills. If they agree, if they agree that it's something worth looking closer into, it goes to the floor. So then there's a 2 or 3 tier process. It requires a simple majority to pass, and then it goes to the House. So this is a step that you would, if you ever got in this situation, you would learn this from whoever you were dealing with. I'm not going to go too deep. I'm not going to ask you a lot of questions test-wise as far as this legislative process. That's kind of why I wanted to go ahead and just get through this chapter. Now, when they're trying to pass a bill, if committee of members from both sides, they can meet to try to reconcile differences. And we're seeing that happen today in the federal government. You know, this head-butting between Republicans and Democrats and trying to pass stimulus money and things like that. And you get holdups. Once they finally can come to terms, then it has to go back through the legislative bodies for final approval. Once a bill becomes a law, governors usually have 60 to 90 days to veto that, and a 60% vote can override a veto. So these are just some things that, as an advocate for our clients, and through being, you know, looking at them as a person, not a statistic or not as a disability, some things you can do is to talk to others about the benefits of therapeutic recreation for people with disabilities. Urge other people to be more inclusive and accepting toward people with disabilities. You can volunteer, you know, do something, it says. Actions speak louder than words, as they say. Suggest organizations conduct benefits to support legislative advocacy, blah, blah, blah. And we're not going to worry about that one. Meet your legislators if possible, if you're in a situation where you might be trying to get some help. And there is a National Recreation and Park Association legislative mid-year meeting. I have never been to that. But that is a way to be involved if you wanted to be. So again, current legislation, ADA, we've talked about that. IDEA, we talked about that. ADA, accessibility, equality. IDEA is education for people, free and appropriate education for everybody with a disability. Medicaid, that is who does a lot of the payments for people with disabilities. Most of the clients at the regional center where I worked were on Medicaid. And I think I'm going to cut y'all loose for the day. I think that was more than enough. Let me look real quick at one thing. And I'm going to stop screen sharing here. Hang on. And I want to look and see what we have. Okay, I'm pretty sure that we have, before I let you go, let me just look at something real quick. 2, 3, 4. My stuff is all out of order. My kid got in my notebook this weekend. So I'm trying to see if we have covered Chapter 5. Do you guys remember if we've gone over Chapter 5 yet? Places, models, and modalities of practice. I really don't think so.
We haven't. We haven't.
Okay. Let's cover Chapter 5 next class.
Okay.
No, I tell you what. I'm going to stop with what we've talked about here. And what we're going to do is Thursday, we're going to have a review day. We're going to stop with the information that we've covered so far. I'm going to have the test be from this information. So be here on Thursday. We'll review for test 1. And I'll tell you at that point when the time slot will be to take the test. It will be that next week. Okay? So we'll just review on Thursday, give you a chance to ask questions. I'll quiz you guys some and let you guys talk to me because that's a lot more fun to me, even though it's kind of hard on Zoom. I get tired of hearing myself talk the whole time. So I'll quiz you to help you prepare for the test. If you come here, pay attention to that, study the things that we talked about, you'll do great on the test. So I will see you guys on Thursday for a review, and we will test next week. Sound good?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thank you guys for being here, and I'll see y'all later. Y'all have a good
Yes, sir. Have a good day.
All right.
Bye.
Later, guys.